The $150,000 Maserati sat stalled in the middle of the road, and the only person who stopped was a black woman with grease-stained hands. On the desolate highway leading into Aurora City, Logan Whitmore's Maserati, sleek, powerful, and worth more than most homes, sat lifeless, smoke billowing from under the hood. Logan, a well-known businessman and the CEO of Whitmore Industries, slammed his palm against the steering wheel, his face twisted with visible frustration. He was late for a multi-million-dollar meeting, the presentation that would outline the future expansion of his entire corporation. No signal on his phone, no sign of a tow truck, and the sun above beat down mercilessly through the windshield. Then, out of nowhere, the low rumble of an engine approached. A beat-up old pickup truck pulled over onto the shoulder. The door creaked open, and a black woman stepped out. Plaid shirt, sleeves rolled up high, jeans streaked with oil and grease. "Car died on you?" she asked, her voice steady and firm. Logan frowned, barely able to respond before she walked right up and popped the hood, without even asking for permission. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. "Helping you get where you need to be," she replied calmly. Logan was about to protest, but said nothing. And in that moment, she reached under the hood and twisted a bolt with practiced ease, his eyes locked onto her hand. A silver sapphire ring glinted on her finger, and a wave of shock surged through his entire body. That ring was the very last gift he had given to a girl from long ago, a girl he had promised never to forget. Yet ultimately, she was the one he had left behind. "You promised you'd come back. I waited 20 years. Her name was Brielle Carter. She didn't mention it, and Logan didn't recognize her. To him, she was just an anonymous mechanic who showed up in the middle of a crisis. But when his eyes landed on the sapphire ring, a small stone set in a worn silver band, his heart clenched without warning. The shock didn't come only from recognizing the keepsake. It was the avalanche of memories, long buried, that suddenly came flooding back. That summer, at St. Clair's Home for Orphans, there was a little girl with bright eyes who always sat quietly in the corner of the yard, carving wood. She had given Logan, a new arrival at the time, a small wooden bird-shaped pin. Logan had hugged her tight and whispered, "I'll come back. Wait for me." But he never did. His adoptive parents took him away. A new life, a new name, a future filled with status and ambition. And the promise he made that day slowly faded into the background of his success. Only Brielle never forgot. She kept the ring. She kept the wooden pin he once returned. She kept the memory as if it were a fragment of childhood she could never bring herself to let go of. Logan stood under the scorching sun, feeling time collapse around him. He couldn't remember her name, but the ring on her finger was undeniable proof of something he once promised and had forgotten. You didn't forget. You just chose not to remember. In the dim corner of Hope Mechanical, Brielle wiped the grease from her hands, her eyes never leaving Logan, who now stood frozen like stone. "You promised you'd come back." Her voice wasn't angry. It carried a sadness so heavy it seemed to pull the air down with it. "You left, disappeared, and for 20 years there was never an explanation." Logan tried to speak, but no words could mend the silence of 2 decades. He used to believe he was living the dream. Successful CEO, soon to marry Elise Hampton, heiress to a fashion empire. But standing here, face to face with Brielle, he realized he'd never truly been himself. "I'm about to marry someone I don't love, inherit a company I never chose." His voice cracked into a whisper. "And now, standing in front of you, I finally understand what it means to lose something. Brielle turned away quietly, opened an old drawer in her workbench, and placed a thick, yellowed file in front of him. "Do you know what the land beneath the new Whitmore Industries headquarters used to be?" she asked, her gaze drilling into him. Logan picked it up. The first line hit him like ice. "Property transferred under illegal coercion. Original owner, the Carter family." She looked at him, her tone calm but razor sharp. "That land belonged to my ancestors, taken away with one signature and a single threat." This time, Logan had nothing left to defend himself. The past he had ignored was now staring him in the face and demanding justice through the one thing he could no longer deny: the truth. The truth doesn't just hurt. It destroys the entire world you once believed was real. Logan sat alone in the Whitmore family library, a place his father had forbidden anyone to enter. In his hands was an old, dust-covered file stamped in red. Project Aurora. In his life, Logan had cracked open his own father's safe. The first few pages were architectural blueprints, but the deeper he read, the more he felt himself sinking into an abyss. A death certificate. Name: Amelia Carter, Brielle's mother. Listed as deceased in 2003. Cause: car accident. Logan froze, but just minutes later, he found another document, a medical report. It bore the unmistakable signature of his father, Charles Whitmore, stating, "Patient Carter is alive. Transferred to internal psychiatric facility. Date noted, 2009. Logan's hands trembled. Brielle's mother hadn't died. She'd been imprisoned for 20 years to force her to surrender the land. His fingers shook as he turned to the final document. It was an adoption certificate. Name of the adopted child, Logan Miles, with a chilling annotation beside it: to replace deceased biological son during childbirth. He wasn't a Whitmore by blood. Everything he had, his name, his fortune, his place in the world, had begun with a lie. Logan leaned back against the bookshelf, his eyes burning. His father hadn't just stolen land. He had destroyed a family and built an empire from the rubble of betrayal. And now, Logan, the son who never carried Whitmore blood, was the one left to decide: continue the lie, or tear it all down to restore justice. Some truths can't stay buried beneath the red carpet. Sooner or later, they burst forth under the spotlight. That afternoon, Aurora City's Central Plaza stood silent. The wind whispered through empty stone benches where Logan and Brielle had once said goodbye 20 years ago, back when they were just two children at the Open Heart Orphanage. Brielle waited, a fabric-wrapped file held gently in her hands. Logan approached slowly, his eyes uncertain but resolute. No longer the arrogant millionaire. He was now a man, confronting the darkest corners of his legacy. "This is the original land deed from 1869, Brielle said, as she opened the file and handed it to him. "A map of the Carter family's farm, and a photo of my mother, Evelyn. All of it was buried, to make way for a project that carries your name, the Whitmore Industrial Complex." Logan said nothing, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes: guilt, helplessness, and a new, unwavering determination. "We have to end this," Brielle whispered. Logan nodded. "At the inauguration tonight, in front of the press, in front of everyone who ever believed in the lie called Whitmore." That evening, the ceremony unfolded with grandeur. Cameras flashed, lights burned bright. Charles Whitmore, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, stepped onto the stage to introduce the structure bearing his name. But before he could finish his speech, a figure emerged from the crowd. Brielle, in her hands, the file, and right behind her, Logan, Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks as Brielle spoke, each word echoing like a bell, tolling through history. I am the daughter of Evelyn Carter, and this is the story the Whitmore Corporation buried for the last 20 years. There are moments when the truth is no longer a choice. It becomes a storm that forces the world to listen. The main stage at the inauguration ceremony fell into a frozen silence as Brielle laid out the evidence, piece by piece. A land transfer signed under duress, a falsified death certificate for Evelyn Carter, and official forensic documents from the state confirming it all. Charles Whitmore didn't just steal land, Brielle said firmly, her voice ringing out as she locked eyes with the front row, where high-ranking officials sat breathless. He imprisoned my mother for 20 years, separated her from her child, and adopted another to cover every trace of his crimes. Charles scoffed, a sneer curling at his lips. Absurd accusations from a no-name mechanic and a brainwashed child. But then, a voice echoed from backstage, familiar, undeniable. You can't cover this up anymore, Charles. Everyone turned. Evelyn Carter, the woman the world believed dead, stood there, her hair silvered by time, her eyes still burning with fire. My daughter is Brielle, she declared, stepping onto the stage, and Logan is my son. You tore apart our bloodline, but you will never divide the truth. Logan stood frozen. Mother, he whispered. Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. You're the son of Amelia, my sister, Brielle's younger brother, taken, adopted, used as a pawn in a power game. Off stage, Madeline Cooper, Logan's fiancée, stood silent, phone in hand, carefully recording every moment. She didn't yet realize that the very footage she captured would become the irrefutable evidence, the spark that would bring the Whitmore empire crashing down overnight. Some empires don't fall because of rivals, but because the truth was buried, cut through the chaos. Red and blue lights flashed across the pale face of Charles Whitmore as two officers stepped onto the stage, an arrest warrant in hand. Charles Whitmore, you are under arrest for the following charges: unlawful imprisonment, property seizure, document forgery, and abuse of the adoption system. Charles tried to maintain composure, but his hands trembled as the cuffs snapped shut, right in front of dozens of cameras and flashing lenses. The empire he had built over 40 years was crumbling, not at the hands of business rivals, but beneath the weight of a truth that had been buried for decades. Within 24 hours, Whitmore Industries' stock plummeted. Investors pulled out, projects were suspended, contracts terminated. The entire infrastructure collapsed like dominoes falling, one after another. At the press conference held shortly after the arrest, Logan stood beside Brielle and Evelyn. Gone was the image of a polished CEO born into privilege. In its place stood a man who had finally reclaimed his roots. Today, Logan said, locking eyes with the press, I reject the Whitmore name. I no longer represent that legacy. From this moment forward, I am Logan Carter, with the full responsibility of a son, a brother, and a man freed from lies. His words rang out like a bell, marking the end of a dynasty built on deceit, and the beginning of a new chapter where justice would be rewritten by those who had once been rendered invisible. Justice isn't just about punishing the wrong. It's about restoring what was stolen. After weeks of litigation and document verification, the court officially recognized the Carter family's ownership of the land. The very land that once formed the heart of the Carter estate, seized by Charles Whitmore, had now been rightfully returned. Not through brute force or wealth, but through truth and unyielding determination. The glittering signs that once read, Whitmore Complex, were taken down. Logan, now having reclaimed the Carter name, stood beside Brielle at a press conference that would send shockwaves through the city. "We're not turning this place into a new seat of power," Brielle said proudly. "We're turning it into a place of healing. For nature, for the community, and for kids like me, unseen, unheard, and without a home." Across the vast acreage, a nature reserve was established, protecting the fragile ecosystem once threatened by industrial projects. Beside it rose the Carter Community Center, offering vocational training, free medical care, and legal aid for the underprivileged. But that wasn't the end. The Carter Foundation was born, founded by Brielle herself, dedicated to supporting orphans, awarding scholarships, and empowering children to build their futures with their own hands. Justice hadn't arrived by sword or vengeance, but through the persistence of a woman the world had once forgotten, a woman who now redefined the future for an entire community. Family isn't where we're born, it's where we choose to stay and heal, together. At Aurora Auto Works, a small garage tucked on the outskirts of town, the rhythmic hum of machines echoed steadily. But today, amidst the sound of engines, there was also laughter. Brielle Carter and Logan Carter, once two people standing on opposite ends of the world, now stood side by side, like puzzle pieces that had finally found their match. Logan, dressed in a mechanic's uniform, leaned over the engine of a pickup truck as if he'd belonged there his entire life. No more $1,000 suits, no more corporate boardrooms, just grease-streaked hands, and a small wooden bird pin sparkling on his shirt pocket. "You still have it?" Brielle asked, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "I never forgot," Logan replied, his voice low and warm. "It just took me too long to find my way back." Evelyn, the mother once believed lost, now lived in a modest home behind the garage. Each morning she brewed tea, watered her plants, and watched her two children, once torn apart by lies, write a brand new chapter together. By afternoon, neighborhood kids would stop by the garage. Brielle taught them how to hold a wrench. Logan shared stories of lessons learned the hard way. Aurora Auto Works was no longer just a place for fixing cars. It had become a symbol of reunion, of renewal, of beginning again. A place where a broken family found a way to piece itself back together. With love, with truth, and a wooden bird pin that had always known the way home. I was once forgotten, but in that silence, I learned exactly when to speak. A spotlight beamed down on the podium inside Columbia University's auditorium. Not on a CEO, a black woman wearing a grease-stained shirt, Brielle Carter, standing before hundreds of students, hanging on her every word. Once deemed invisible on a dusty roadside, she was now a storyteller, shaking the soul of a nation. She spoke of a sapphire ring, once the symbol of a promise broken, yet also the thread that reconnected two seemingly distant lives. She spoke of the orphanage, of cold nights with no one to call her name, of a past buried beneath the concrete foundation of greedy empires. And then she spoke of how an unknown mechanic dared to rise, to expose the truth, to reclaim justice, not through power, but through resilience and intelligence. News of her swept through headlines, broadcasts, podcasts. No one called her that mechanic anymore. They called her the flame from Aurora, a symbol of truth, of justice, and of how one ordinary person's courage could shake an entire system. A student raised their hand. "Weren't you afraid? Standing up against an empire?" Brielle smiled. "I used to fear being forgotten. Now, I only fear the truth being left untold. This is what keeps us bound together, no matter how hard the world tries to tear us apart." The golden light of dusk spilled across the modest porch of Aurora Auto Works, a place no longer defined by the sound of engines alone, but now a home, rebuilt from the ruins of a family broken for nearly 3 decades. Evelyn Carter, the mother once held captive in darkness, gently opened her palm. Resting there was the sapphire ring, shimmering under the sun, an object that had survived over 20 years of turmoil, separation, and quiet hope. She looked at Brielle, her eyes trembling, yet filled with unshakable resolve. "This ring was once your father's proposal," Evelyn said softly. "Then it became a symbol of everything lost. Today, I want you to keep it, not as a scar, but as an inheritance." Brielle reached out, her hands trembling as she received it. She was no longer the orphaned girl the world once overlooked. She was the woman who had made an entire system bow before the truth. Yet in that moment, she felt simply like a daughter, finally trusted with her mother's legacy. Logan stood quietly behind them, his fingers brushing against the small wooden bird pin on his chest, a childhood promise, now fulfilled. The ring, once a dividing line between 2 worlds, had become a bridge between past and present, loss and restoration, fracture and reunion. A circle had closed, but the journey to protect the truth was only just beginning. One individual can challenge an entire system with resilience and wisdom. On national television, the widely watched social commentary program America Rethinks welcomed a special guest, Dr. Rachel Monroe, a renowned sociologist from Columbia University, known for her extensive research on justice movements across the United States. When the host asked about the now explosive case of Whitmore versus Carter, Dr. Monroe didn't hesitate. "What we're witnessing is more than a land reclamation battle. It's a living testament. Justice isn't a theory, it's action." A black woman, rendered invisible by society, stood up, unearthed the truth, and confronted an entire corporate empire. Brielle Carter's story quickly became a focal point in law school seminars, business ethics classes, and even executive leadership trainings. She didn't win through rage alone, Dr. Monroe emphasized. She prevailed through grit, legal understanding, and a heart untouched by hate. In a country still steeped in inequality, Brielle's journey was not merely personal. It served as a powerful reminder. Even those considered voiceless can make the system listen when they walk with truth and refuse to step back. "They forgot me because they thought I didn't matter, but I'm the one who made their entire empire bow to the truth." The golden light of sunset spilled across the corrugated rooftop of Aurora Auto Works. On the rooftop, Brielle Carter stood in silence, gazing out over the city of Aurora. The place that once forgot her, that once witnessed the silent tears of a child left behind. Beneath her feet lay the land that had once belonged to her ancestors. Now no longer a symbol of greed and seizure, but a community sanctuary where children could learn, play, and dream, unburdened by the weight of history. Beside her stood Logan Carter, no longer the distant CEO, but a brother, a man who had rediscovered his true identity through a journey of truth. In his hand was the wooden bird pin, a symbol of an old promise, a promise once thought forgotten, but in the end, it had led them both home. Brielle smiled gently, then whispered, not to anyone else, but to herself. "I used to be invisible, erased from history by those in power, but in the end, I became the one who rewrote it. They thought I wasn't worth remembering. They never imagined I'd be the one to make their empire kneel to justice." The circle of justice had finally closed, not with shouts of revenge, but with the unshakable strength of a woman the world once forgot.